Marcus stood in the center of the workshop, surrounded by the greatest tension the ancient station had ever witnessed. On one side, the perfect Zephyrians radiated cold authority, their flawless forms demanding submission to their aesthetic supremacy. On the other side, the flawed workers pressed against the walls, their damaged faces filled with desperate hope that someone might finally speak for them. The silence stretched on for long moments as Marcus considered his response. He looked at High Curator Veltesh, whose perfect features showed absolute certainty that the human would submit to superior civilization. He looked at the workers whose hands had built wonders but whose appearances marked them as worthless in their own society. Finally, he looked at Cathara, whose scarred face reflected a lifetime of being told she was ugly and worthless. "High Curator," Marcus said finally, his voice calm and steady, "I appreciate your ultimatum, but I think you are asking the wrong question." Veltesh's perfect eyebrows rose slightly. "What question should I be asking? Not whether I will accept your standards, but whether your people can afford to reject mine." Marcus gestured around the workshop. "You have built a society that wastes the potential of half its population. You preserve perfect bodies in stasis while the minds that create your marvels remain hidden away like shameful secrets. These creatures serve their purpose," Velnash interjected. "They are useful in their limited roles." "Limited roles?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Chief Engineer Mordak has solved gravitational field problems that your greatest scientists couldn't even understand. The artist with the burned face creates living spaces that bring peace to dozens of species. The musician with the broken voice composes melodies that touch souls across the galaxy." Marcus activated his holographic display again, but this time he showed images from the workshop tour. Mordak explaining her gravitational systems, her scarred hands moving with practiced precision. The burned artist sketching designs that blended function and beauty in impossible ways. The broken-voiced musician creating songs that spoke to the deepest emotions of 100 different species. "You call them limited," Marcus continued, "but they are the ones who make your perfect society possible. They design your stations, create your art, solve your problems, and maintain your technology. Your perfect specimens contribute nothing but their appearance." The perfect Zephyrians shifted uncomfortably, unused to having their value questioned so directly. But Marcus was not finished. "Let me tell you what I propose," he said, his voice gaining strength. "Not a choice between your standards and mine, but a partnership that combines both, your people's pursuit of aesthetic perfection with humanity's appreciation for character, experience, and achievement." "Impossible," Veltesh declared. "Beauty is absolute. Mathematical perfection cannot be compromised by primitive sentiment." "Can't it?" Marcus turned to address the entire group, both perfect and flawed. "What if I told you that humanity has something your society lacks? What if our appreciation for imperfection could unlock potential you never knew existed?" He walked over to where Cathara stood, her damaged face turned partially away as always. "Cathara, you have spent your life hiding your scars, minimizing your presence, trying to be invisible. But what if you stopped hiding? What if you stood proud of who you are and what you have accomplished?" Cathara looked at him with terror in her eyes. "I cannot. They would see my ugliness." "They would see your strength," Marcus said gently. "They would see someone who overcame challenges to become extraordinary. They would see the beauty that comes from surviving, learning, and growing." Slowly, carefully, Marcus reached out and brushed aside the hair that Cathara used to cover her scarred cheek. She flinched at first, then stood still, trembling, as her damaged face was revealed in full view of everyone present. "Look at her," Marcus said, addressing the perfect Zephyrians. "Really look at her. These scars tell a story. They show someone who has lived, who has experienced real challenges and grown from them. This asymmetry is not a flaw. It is evidence of a unique individual shaped by unique experiences." The perfect being stared in obvious discomfort, but Marcus continued. Her missing fingers came from an accident while she was working to improve interspecies communication protocols. She sacrificed her physical perfection to help others understand each other better. How is that not beautiful? Chief Engineer. Mordak stepped forward from the group of workers, her mechanical arm gleaming in the workshop lights. "Ambassador," she said, her scarred voice steady and strong. "For 60 years I have been told that my damaged body makes me worthless except as a tool. But listening to you, I begin to wonder if perhaps we have been measuring worth with the wrong scale." Other workers began to move away from the walls drawn by her courage. The burned artist lifted her mottled face with pride for the first time in decades. The musician with the broken voice began to hum one of his haunting melodies, the imperfect, sounds filling the workshop with unexpected beauty. "You see," Marcus said to the perfect Zephyrians, "this is what happens when beings stop hiding their true selves. When they embrace their experiences instead of being ashamed of them, they become more than they ever thought possible." Veltesh's perfect features showed confusion and growing anger. "This is chaos. This is the destruction of everything we have built." "No," said a new voice from the entrance to the workshop. "This is evolution." Everyone turned to see an elderly Zephyrian approaching, supported by a walking device that suggested advanced age and physical frailty. Her face bore the lines and marks of centuries of life, her body bent by time and experience. But her eyes held a wisdom that made even the perfect beings step back respectfully. "Elder Morthes," Veltesh whispered, "you should not be in this place, the presence of these flawed beings." "I built this place," the ancient Zephyrian said firmly, her aged voice carrying absolute authority. 60 years ago, when I was considered beautiful enough to be preserved in the gallery, I chose instead to work with these so-called flawed beings to create something that had never existed before. The revelation sent shockwaves through both groups. A being who had achieved perfect beauty had chosen to age, to work, to become imperfect by choice. I have watched our society grow more rigid, more obsessed with static perfection, while the real work of civilization was carried out by those we deemed unworthy of attention. Elder Morthes looked directly at Marcus. "This human understands something we have forgotten. That true beauty lies not in perfection, but in the courage to grow, to change, to become more than what you started as." She turned to address the perfect Zephyrians. "You preserve bodies in stasis unchanging and static, but I chose to let time mark me, to let experience shape me, to let my work leave its traces on my form. I chose to become beautiful through living rather than through preservation." Kethara stepped forward, no longer trying to hide her scars. "Elder, is it possible? Can we really change how our people see beauty?" "We can, if we have the courage to stand up and be seen," the elder replied. "Not despite our imperfections, but because of what they represent. Growth, experience, the willingness to risk change for the sake of achievement." One by one, the flawed workers began to step forward, moving away from the walls where they had hidden for so long. They stood straighter, met eyes directly, and for the first time in their lives refused to apologize for their appearance. Veltesh looked around desperately as his perfect world began to crumble. "This cannot be allowed. The order of our society will evolve," Elder Morthes interrupted, "as it must if we are to survive and grow." She looked at Marcus with respect. "Ambassador Chen, humanity offers us something we desperately need, the wisdom to see beauty in struggle, strength in scars, and worth in the willingness to risk imperfection for the sake of achievement." Marcus smiled, the same genuine warmth he had shown from the beginning. "And your people offer us something equally valuable, the technical skills and ancient wisdom to help us build a better future together. Not perfect, but constantly growing and improving." Kethara walked over to stand beside Marcus, her scarred face visible to all. "Ambassador," she said quietly, "I think I finally understand what you meant when you said beauty isn't what I think it is." "What is it then?" he asked gently. "Beauty is the courage to be yourself, scars and all. Beauty is the strength to turn your pain into purpose. Beauty is the willingness to risk everything to help others understand each other." Her damaged voice grew stronger. "Beauty is choosing to live and grow instead of hiding in perfection." Marcus nodded. And that, Kethara, is why I find you beautiful. The workshop erupted in a sound that station harmony had never heard before. Applause, cheers, and the music of voices that were no longer afraid to be heard. The flawed and imperfect celebrated their liberation from shame, while some of the perfect beings began to question everything they had believed about worth and beauty. Not all the perfect Zephyrians accepted the change. Veltesh and his followers retreated to their galleries and their preserved specimens, clinging to their static ideals of perfection. But others, inspired by Elder Morthes and the courage of the workers, began to consider that perhaps there was more to beauty than mathematical. He next morning came too quickly for Kethara. She had spent most of the night cycle staring at the ceiling of her quarters, replaying every word of her conversation with the human ambassador. His final statement echoed in her mind like a puzzle she could not solve. Beauty isn't what you think it is. What could he possibly mean by that? Kethara prepared herself for another day of diplomatic duties, carefully arranging her hair to cover as much of her scarred face as possible, and selecting clothing that would minimize attention to her physical flaws. The routine was automatic, now developed over years of trying to make herself invisible in a society that valued perfection above all else. She found Marcus waiting in the transport hub, studying a holographic display of the station's layout with obvious fascination. When he noticed her approach, his face lit up with the same genuine smile he had offered the day before. "Good morning, Kethara. I hope you rested well," he said warmly. "Well enough, Ambassador. Today I am instructed to take you to our most sacred cultural site, the Gallery of Eternal Perfection." Kethara's voice carried a note of reluctance. "It is considered essential viewing for all visiting dignitaries. I'm looking forward to it," Marcus replied, though Kethara detected something in his tone that suggested he was more curious than excited. They boarded a transport pod that whisked them through the station's arterial passages at incredible speed. Through the transparent walls, Marcus could see the massive scale of the structure, with corridors and chambers branching off in all directions like the veins of some enormous organism. "The gallery is located at the very heart of the station," Kethara explained as they traveled. "It represents the pinnacle of Zephyrian achievement in biological and aesthetic perfection. The specimens housed there are considered the most beautiful beings our race has ever produced." "Specimens?" Marcus asked, catching the clinical term. Kethara hesitated. "Perhaps that is not the correct translation. They are individuals who have achieved such perfect physical form that they have transcended normal existence. They are preserved in stasis so that their beauty can inspire future generations." The transport pod came to a smooth halt, and they stepped out into a vast circular chamber that took Marcus's breath away. The space soared upward for what seemed like miles, with tiers upon tiers of alcoves carved into the walls. Each alcove contained a transparent cylinder filled with softly glowing fluid, and within each cylinder floated a Zephyrian in perfect suspended animation. The lighting was carefully orchestrated to highlight every curve and angle of the preserved beings. Each face was geometrically perfect, with features arranged in absolute symmetry. Their bodies showed no signs of age, wear, or imperfection. They were living art, frozen at the peak of physical beauty. "Magnificent, are they not?" said a voice behind them. Marcus turned to see a small group of Zephyrians approaching, led by an individual whose perfection was immediately obvious even among his flawless companions. This being's face was so symmetrical, it seemed almost artificial, every feature precisely balanced and proportioned according to mathematical principles. "Ambassador Chen," Kethara said quickly, "allow me to present Curator Velnash, the keeper of the gallery." Velnash executed a perfect bow, every movement graceful and precise. "It is an honor to welcome the first human representative to witness our greatest treasures. I trust you find them as inspiring as we do." Marcus walked slowly along the nearest tier of alcoves, studying each preserved being with careful attention. The craftsmanship was undeniable. Every individual represented the pinnacle of genetic and aesthetic achievement, their features refined over generations of selective breeding and enhancement. "The preservation process is remarkable," Marcus said finally. "How long can they be maintained in this state?" Indefinitely, Velnash replied with obvious pride. They will remain perfect forever, untouched by time or decay. Future generations will be able to witness true beauty exactly as we see it today. And they chose this willingly? Marcus asked. Of course. It is the highest honor our society can bestow, to achieve such perfection that one's beauty must be preserved for eternity. Velnash gestured to the tiers above them. We have over 10,000 such specimens, each representing the best of their generation. Marcus continued his circuit of the gallery, nodding appreciatively at the technical achievement while the group of perfect Zephyrians followed behind him. Kethera remained at a respectful distance, clearly uncomfortable in this temple to everything she was not. They are indeed technically perfect, Marcus said when he had completed his examination of several tiers. The symmetry is flawless, the proportions mathematically ideal. You appreciate true beauty, then, Velnash said with satisfaction. I was concerned that human aesthetic sense might be too primitive to recognize perfection when confronted with it. Oh, I can certainly recognize perfection, Marcus replied. But I noticed something interesting. They all look remarkably similar to each other. The comment caused a stir among the perfect Zephyrians. Several exchanged glances, and Velnash's expression showed a trace of confusion. Similar? He asked. Each is unique, the product of different genetic lines and enhancement programs. Perhaps similar is the wrong word, Marcus said thoughtfully. But they do all conform to the same basic template, don't they? The same proportions, the same symmetrical arrangement of features, the same flawless skin tone. That is because there is only one true form of beauty, Velnash explained patiently. Over centuries, our scientists have determined the precise mathematical ratios and genetic combinations that produce the most aesthetically pleasing result. These beings represent the culmination of that research. Marcus nodded slowly. I see. And who created this gallery? Who designed the preservation systems and the lighting arrangements that display them so effectively? Velnash waved dismissively. Technical workers, of course. Beings whose function is to serve beauty rather than embody it. I'd be very interested in meeting some of these technical workers, Marcus said. The engineering required for this facility must be extraordinary. I hardly think that would be appropriate, Velnash said stiffly. They are not suitable for diplomatic contact. Why not? Marcus asked with genuine curiosity. They are aesthetically inferior, flawed. It would be insulting to subject a distinguished visitor to their presence. Marcus glanced over at Kethera, who had been silent throughout the exchange. Her posture was rigid, her scarred face carefully turned away from the group. You mean they look like my guide? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Velnash's perfect features showed a flash of discomfort. Kethera serves a functional role. She is adequate for basic liaison duties, but surely you would prefer to be accompanied by someone more presentable for important cultural exchanges. Actually, Marcus said, his voice taking on a cooler tone, I find Kethera to be an excellent guide. Her knowledge is comprehensive. Her insights are valuable, and her communication skills are superior to anyone else I've met since arriving. But surely you must see, Velnash began. I see someone who designed the integration systems that allow this station to function. I see someone who learned my language in 3 years and can explain complex cultural concepts with clarity and precision. I see someone whose mind is obviously remarkable. Marcus paused, looking directly at the curator. What exactly do you see when you look at her? Velnash struggled for words, clearly unused to having his fundamental assumptions challenged. I see imperfection, damage, a being who serves a purpose but who could never inspire the kind of reverence appropriate for true beauty. Then perhaps, Marcus said quietly, we have very different definitions of what makes someone worth respecting. The tension in the gallery was palpable now. The perfect Zephyrians looked between their curator and the human ambassador, sensing that something significant was happening, but unable to understand exactly what. I would very much like to meet the beings who designed and built this place, Marcus continued. The artists, the engineers, the technical specialists who made all of this possible. Would that be arranged? Velnash looked as though he had been asked to perform something distasteful. If you insist, Ambassador, but I cannot understand why you would waste your time with such inferior specimens when you could be studying true perfection. Beauty isn't what you think it is, Marcus said again, this time loud enough for everyone in the gallery to hear. Cathara looked up at him with an expression of wonder mixed with terror, beginning to understand that this strange human was about to challenge everything her society believed about worth and beauty, and the nature of perfection itself. The industrial sectors of Station Harmony were a world away from the polished perfection of the gallery. Here, the walls showed the honest wear of constant use, marked with the scratches and stains that came from real work. The air carried the scent of metal and energy, the sound of machinery humming with purpose. This was where the station truly lived and breathed. Cathara led Marcus through corridors lined with workshops and laboratories, her steps more confident now than they had been in the gallery. This was her domain, the place where the flawed and imperfect carried out the essential work that kept their perfect society functioning. Curator Velnash was not pleased with your request, she said as they walked. He made it clear that he considers this visit a waste of your valuable time. What do you consider it? Marcus asked. Cathara paused, considering the question carefully. I consider it the first time anyone has shown genuine interest in meeting the people who actually built the wonders that everyone else admires. Their first stop was a vast fabrication hall where massive structural components were being assembled. The work required incredible precision, as each piece had to fit perfectly into the station's complex architecture while maintaining the structural integrity needed to house millions of beings. The supervisor who approached them was clearly Zephyrian, but bore the marks of a lifetime spent in practical work. Her hands showed the calluses and small scars that came from handling tools and materials. One arm had been replaced with a mechanical prosthetic that moved with smooth efficiency. Her face was asymmetrical, with one eye slightly clouded from an old injury. I am Chief Engineer Mordak, she said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who knew her worth regardless of what others might think of her appearance. Cathara told me you wish to see how we keep this station operational. I'm fascinated by the engineering challenges involved, Marcus replied genuinely. The scale of this project must have required solutions to problems that had never been encountered before. Mordak's scarred face lit up with enthusiasm. Indeed, when we began construction 60 years ago, there was no precedent for a structure of this size that could accommodate so many different species safely. We had to invent new techniques for everything from atmospheric processing to gravitational field management. She led them to a massive holographic display showing the station's internal systems in 3 dimensions. The complexity was staggering, with thousands of interconnected networks managing everything from life support to waste recycling, to the delicate balance of artificial gravity that kept beings with vastly different physiological needs comfortable in the same structure. This network here manages the atmospheric composition in over 1 million individual chambers, Mordak explained, pointing to a section of the display that pulsed with flowing data streams. Each species requires slightly different gas mixtures, pressure levels, and humidity. The system has to adjust constantly as beings move through the station, predicting their needs and preparing environments before they arrive. Marcus studied the display with obvious admiration. The computational requirements alone must be enormous. How do you process all that information in real time? We developed a new form of distributed computing that spreads the processing load across thousands of smaller units throughout the station. Each unit handles the immediate local environment while coordinating with its neighbors to maintain overall stability. Mordak's damaged face glowed with pride as she explained her life's work. They moved on to other workshops, each one revealing new marvels of engineering and creativity. In one laboratory, Marcus met a team of artists who were designing new sections of the station's living quarters. Their leader was a Zephyrian whose face had been severely burned in an industrial accident years before, leaving her skin mottled and scarred. But her artistic vision was extraordinary, creating living spaces that seemed to blend function and beauty in ways that Marcus had never imagined possible. We study how different species interact with their environments, she explained, showing Marcus sketches and models of proposed designs. Some beings need wide open spaces to feel comfortable, while others prefer smaller, more intimate chambers. Some are attracted to bright colors and bold patterns, while others find peace in subtle textures and soft lighting. We try to create spaces that speak to the deepest needs of those who will inhabit them. Marcus spent nearly an hour examining her work, asking detailed questions about her design philosophy and the psychological principles she applied. The burned artist had never experienced such focused attention from an outsider, and her initial nervousness gradually gave way to animated discussion about her craft. In another workshop, they found a musician whose vocal cords had been damaged in childhood, leaving his voice rough and broken by Zephyrian standards. But he had learned to use that imperfection as an instrument itself, creating haunting melodies that incorporated the natural breaks and catches in his speech. His compositions were played throughout the station's public spaces, providing a soundtrack that somehow made the vast structure feel more intimate and welcoming. "Most people think my voice is ugly," he told Marcus after performing one of his pieces. "But I have learned that ugly sounds, when arranged properly, can create beautiful music. The imperfection adds emotion that perfect voices cannot achieve." Marcus listened to several more compositions, each one more moving than the last. "Your music tells stories," he said finally. "Each break in your voice carries meaning, adds depth to the melody. Perfect voices might be technically superior, but they could never convey the same emotional complexity." The musician stared at Marcus in amazement. "You truly understand. I have spent decades trying to explain this to others, but they hear only the flaws." As the day progressed, Marcus met dozens more of the station's essential workers, engineers, with missing limbs who designed prosthetics that were works of art, as well as functional tools. Architects whose scarred faces had been marked by exposure to dangerous materials while they pioneered new construction techniques. Scientists whose asymmetrical features reflected the long hours spent in laboratories developing the technologies that made interspecies cooperation possible. Each conversation revealed new depths of creativity, innovation, and dedication. These flawed beings had spent their lives solving problems, creating beauty, and building the systems that allowed their perfect society to function. Yet they remained, invisible to most of their own people, valued only for their utility and hidden away from public view. Cathara watched Marcus throughout the day, observing how he interacted with each person they met. He asked thoughtful questions about their work, complimented their innovations, and showed genuine interest in their ideas and experiences. He photographed their creations, recorded their explanations, and requested copies of their artistic works to share with others. "You see something in them that their own people do not," she said quietly as they paused between workshops. "I see beings who have taken their challenges and transformed them into strengths," Marcus replied. "That engineer with the prosthetic arm has designed artificial limbs that are more capable than biological ones. The artist with the burned face has learned to find beauty in damaged things. The musician with the broken voice has discovered how imperfection can create perfect art." "But they are flawed," Cathara said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Damaged. Imperfect." Marcus turned to face her directly. "Cathara, you designed the cultural integration systems for this entire station. You learned to speak my language fluently in 3 years. You understand the needs and perspectives of dozens of different species well enough to help them coexist peacefully. You see problems from multiple angles and find creative solutions that serve everyone involved." Cathara shifted uncomfortably under his direct gaze. "That is simply my function." "No," Marcus said firmly. "That is your gift, your scars, your asymmetrical features, your missing fingers. They tell a story of someone who has lived, who has experienced challenges and grown from them. They are marks of character, proof of resilience, evidence of a life spent in service to something greater than yourself." Before Cathara could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. They turned to see a group of perfect Zephyrians led by Curator Vel Nash, their flawless faces showing expressions of disgust and outrage. "Ambassador Chen," Vel Nash called out, his musical voice sharp with displeasure. "What is the meaning of this shameful display?" The perfect Zephyrians swept into the workshop area like a wave of crystalline elegance, their flawless forms seeming to glow with inner light against the practical backdrop of tools and machinery. Curator Velnash led the group, his symmetrical features arranged in an expression of barely contained outrage. Behind him followed several other specimens of Zephyrian perfection, including High Curator Veltesh, whose beauty was so absolute that even other perfect beings seemed flawed in comparison. The workers in the fabrication hall immediately stopped what they were doing and moved to the edges of the space, instinctively making themselves as small and invisible as possible. Chief Engineer Mordak stepped protectively in front of her team, her mechanical arm whirring softly as her hands clenched into fists. Ambassador Chen, Velnash said, his musical voice carrying across the workshop with crystal clarity. I must protest in the strongest possible terms. You have been missing for hours, ignoring scheduled cultural presentations to waste your time with these creatures. Marcus straightened to his full height, his human features calm, but his eyes showing a cold anger that made even the perfect Zephyrians pause. Creatures. Is that how you refer to the beings who built this station? They serve a function, High Curator Veltesh interjected, his voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. But they are not suitable company for a distinguished visitor. Their presence diminishes the dignity of these proceedings. Their presence? Marcus looked around at the flawed Zephyrians who had pressed themselves against the walls, trying to become invisible. These beings have created marvels that span star systems. They have solved engineering problems that your perfect specimens could never even comprehend. And you call their presence diminishing? Veltesh glided forward with fluid grace, his perfect form seeming to float rather than walk. Ambassador, perhaps your species lacks the aesthetic sophistication to appreciate true beauty. These damaged beings may seem adequate to human eyes, but surely you can see that they pale in comparison to genuine perfection. Genuine perfection, Marcus repeated slowly. Tell me, High Curator, what have you personally contributed to this station? What problems have you solved? What beauty have you created? The question caught Veltesh off guard. His perfect features showed confusion, as if the concept of personal achievement was foreign to him. I embody perfection. My very existence inspires others to strive for beauty and harmony. By existing, Marcus said flatly, that is your contribution. You exist and others admire your existence. It is the highest calling, Velnash added, clearly sensing his superior's discomfort. To achieve such perfect form that one becomes a living work of art is the greatest achievement possible in civilized society. Marcus turned away from the perfect beings and walked over to where Mordak stood with her team. The engineer's scarred face showed a mixture of fear and hope, uncertain what would happen next but grateful that someone was finally acknowledging their worth. Chief Engineer, Marcus said formally, would you please explain to our guests how the gravitational field generators work in this sector? Mordak glanced nervously at the perfect Zephyrians, then squared her shoulders and began speaking. The gravitational systems require constant adjustment to accommodate beings from different worlds. We use a network of field generators that can create multiple overlapping zones with varying levels of gravitational pull. Each zone must be precisely calibrated to provide comfortable conditions for the specific species present while maintaining structural stability throughout the station. As she spoke, her confidence grew. She gestured to displays and control panels, explaining the complex mathematics and engineering principles involved. Her damaged voice grew stronger, filled with the passion of someone who truly understood her craft. The computational requirements are staggering, she continued. We process over 10 million data points per second, adjusting field strength and direction in real time as beings move through the station. The slightest error could create gravitational shears that would tear apart the structure or crush the inhabitants. Marcus nodded appreciatively. And you designed this system? My team and I developed it over 15 years, Mordak replied with obvious pride. It required entirely new approaches to field mathematics and energy management. No one had ever attempted gravitational control on this scale before. Marcus turned back to the perfect Zephyrians. Did you understand any of that explanation? Veltesh's flawless features showed irritation. Technical details are not the concern of those who embody higher purposes. We inspire others to achieve greatness. But you don't actually achieve anything yourselves, Marcus observed. You are admired for your appearance while others do all the actual work of creating, building, and maintaining your civilization. You speak as if work were more valuable than beauty, Velnash said, his voice showing strain, as if these damaged beings were somehow superior to perfect specimens. I speak as if contribution were more valuable than appearance, Marcus replied firmly. I speak as if the beings who solve problems and create wonders deserve more respect than those who simply exist to be looked at. The tension in the workshop was becoming unbearable. The flawed workers watched in amazement as someone finally stood up to their perfect superiors, while the perfect beings struggled to understand how their fundamental worldview was being challenged. High Curator Veltesh drew himself up to his full height, his perfect form radiating outrage. Ambassador Chen, I believe your species has revealed its primitive nature. You cannot distinguish between mere utility and true worth. These creatures may serve functions, but they will always be inferior to those who have achieved perfect form. Perfect form, Marcus said, and there was something dangerous in his voice now. Let me show you something about perfect form. He pulled out his portable display device and activated a holographic projector. Images began appearing in the air between them, scenes from Earth that showed human faces in all their infinite variety. Elderly faces lined with the marks of laughter and sorrow, young faces glowing with determination and hope, weathered faces that spoke of lives spent in honest work under open skies. This is Dr. Sarah Chen, my colleague, Marcus said, highlighting one image. She lost her left arm in a research accident when she was 25. She went on to develop the prosthetic interfaces that allow humans to control artificial limbs with thought alone. Her missing arm led her to create technology that has restored mobility to millions of people. Another image appeared. This is Captain Maria Santos. The scars on her face come from radiation exposure during a rescue mission where she saved an entire colony ship. She spent 3 months in treatment, her face permanently marked by her heroism. She is considered one of the most beautiful people I know. More images followed, each one showing a human whose imperfections told a story of courage, sacrifice, achievement, or resilience. Marcus's voice grew stronger with each example. This is Professor James Wright, whose stutter made him struggle with speech throughout his childhood. He became our greatest expert on interspecies communication, precisely because he understood the challenge of making yourself understood. This is Dr. Lisa Park, whose asymmetrical features come from a genetic condition that also gave her the unique brain structure that allows her to see mathematical relationships no one else can perceive. The perfect Zephyrian stared at the images in horror, unable to understand how beings with such obvious flaws could be presented as examples of anything positive. You see damaged goods, Marcus continued. I see proof that beauty comes not from perfection, but from the courage to turn your challenges into strengths, from the wisdom that comes from suffering, from the character that develops when you have to fight for everything you achieve. High Curator Veltesh's perfect voice trembled with rage. This is an insult to everything civilized beings hold sacred. Beauty is mathematical perfection, aesthetic harmony, the absence of flaw or imperfection. No, Marcus said quietly. Beauty is the strength to keep going when life marks you. Beauty is the creativity that turns damage into art. Beauty is the compassion that comes from knowing what it means to struggle. He looked directly at Kethara, who had been watching the entire confrontation with wide eyes. Beauty is someone who learns 3 languages to help different species understand each other, someone who designs systems that bring harmony to 1,000,000 different beings, someone whose scars tell the story of a life spent in service to others. Veltesh stepped forward, his perfect form radiating authority. Enough of this primitive nonsense. Ambassador Chen, you will accept our aesthetic standards as the foundation for any diplomatic relationship, or humanity will be excluded from civilized space. Choose now between your barbaric values and membership in the galactic community." The workshop fell silent. Every being present understood that they had reached a moment that would determine not just the future of human-Zephyrian relations, but perhaps the nature of beauty and worth throughout this entire sector of space. Marcus looked around at the flawed workers who had created wonders, at Cathara, whose damaged face showed more character than all the perfect beings combined, and at the specimens of perfection who offered nothing but their appearance. Dr. Marcus Chen adjusted his diplomatic uniform one last time as the transport shuttle docked with Station Harmony. The massive structure hung in the void between solar systems, neutral territory where humanity would attempt its first formal contact with the Zephyrian Commonwealth. Through the viewport, Marcus could see the station's elegant spires twisting upward like frozen music, their surfaces gleaming with an otherworldly perfection that made human architecture seem crude by comparison. The airlock hissed open, and Marcus stepped into a corridor that stretched beyond his vision. The walls curved seamlessly, made from some translucent material that seemed to glow with inner light. Everything was smooth, polished, and absolutely flawless. Even the air tasted different here, processed and purified until it carried no trace of imperfection. Marcus had studied the Zephyrians for months, learning their basic language and customs from intercepted transmissions and the few scattered reports from long-range scouts. He knew they were ancient, powerful, and had dominated this sector of space for over 3,000 years. What the reports had not prepared him for was the overwhelming sense of perfection that surrounded everything they touched. A figure approached from the far end of the corridor, and Marcus straightened his shoulders. This would be his cultural liaison, the individual assigned to guide him through the complex web of Zephyrian society and help establish the foundations for future relations between their species. As the figure drew closer, Marcus could make out more details. The being was humanoid in general shape but distinctly alien, tall and slender, with skin that held a faint blue undertone and large, expressive eyes that seemed to capture and reflect light like cut gemstones. The facial structure was elegant, with high cheekbones and a narrow jaw that gave an impression of refined nobility. But something was wrong, at least by what Marcus had learned of Zephyrian standards. The being's face was not symmetrical. A long scar ran from the left temple down across the cheek, and the left eye sat slightly higher than the right. There were other imperfections too, small deviations from the perfect harmony that Zephyrian society prized above all else. The being stopped, a respectful distance away, and executed what Marcus recognized as a formal greeting bow. When she spoke, her voice carried a musical quality despite its underlying tension. "I am Cathara of the 3rd Administrative Circle. I have been assigned as your cultural guide during these negotiations." Her words were precise, but carried an undertone of resignation. "I must warn you, Ambassador Chen, that I am not what your species would consider an ideal representative of my people." Marcus studied her for a moment, noting the way she held herself slightly turned to minimize the visibility of her scarred side, how her hands remained clasped to hide what he could see were missing fingers on her left hand. Everything about her posture spoke of someone who had learned to make herself as small and unnoticeable as possible. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Cathara," Marcus said, offering a genuine smile. "I'm grateful to have someone with your experience guiding me through what I imagine will be a complex process." Cathara's eyes widened slightly. She had clearly expected a different reaction, perhaps disgust or disappointment. Instead, Marcus stepped closer, his expression one of professional interest mixed with personal warmth. "Your English is excellent," he continued. "How long did it take you to master our language?" Cathara hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "3 of your years, Ambassador. Languages are one of my specializations." "Impressive. I struggled with basic Zephyrian for months and I'm still not confident in my pronunciation." Marcus gestured to the stunning corridor around them. "This station is remarkable. Were you involved in its construction or administration?" Again, Cathara seemed surprised by the direction of the conversation. "I supervised several of the cultural integration systems, the translation protocols, diplomatic chambers, and cross-species environmental controls. That must have been incredibly complex work, managing the needs of dozens of different species while maintaining structural integrity and cultural sensitivity." Marcus shook his head in admiration. I can barely manage the environmental systems in my own quarters. As they began walking deeper into the station, Marcus continued asking questions about Cathara's work, her role in the diplomatic corps, and her perspectives on interspecies relations. With each query, he noticed her posture straightening slightly, her voice gaining confidence. They passed through several different sections of the station, each more impressive than the last. Gardens filled with crystalline plants that chimed softly in artificial breezes, observation decks that offered stunning views of the binary star system beyond, cultural halls where beings from a dozen different species mingled in careful harmony. The Zephyrian Commonwealth has achieved something truly remarkable here, Marcus observed as they paused at one of the observation decks. Creating a space where so many different forms of life can coexist peacefully. The Commonwealth values order and harmony above all else, Cathara replied, though her tone suggested this was a rehearsed response rather than a personal belief. And what do you value? Marcus asked, turning to look at her directly. The question seemed to catch her completely off guard. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. No one had ever asked her such a thing before. I value understanding, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I believe that true harmony comes not from making everyone the same, but from helping them understand each other despite their differences. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. That's a profound philosophy. It must serve you well in diplomatic work. They continued their tour, visiting the Central Assembly chambers where representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered to debate and decide policy for vast regions of space. The architecture was breathtaking, with soaring ceilings and acoustic properties that allowed even the softest voice to be heard clearly from any position in the hall. But Marcus found himself more interested in the smaller details that Cathara pointed out. The subtle modifications made to accommodate species with different atmospheric needs, the careful placement of lighting to avoid disturbing beings with sensitive vision, the intricate scheduling systems that prevented conflicts between groups with incompatible cultural practices. You really understand how all of this works, Marcus said with genuine admiration. The complexity of managing so many different needs and requirements must be staggering. Cathara glanced at him uncertainly. It is simply my function, Ambassador. Nothing more. I disagree, Marcus said firmly. This kind of work requires not just technical knowledge but genuine empathy and creativity. The ability to see problems from multiple perspectives and find solutions that serve everyone involved. They had reached the quarters that had been prepared for Marcus, a suite of rooms designed to accommodate human physiology and preferences. The attention to detail was impressive, from the gravity settings to the color temperature of the lighting. I hope you find everything satisfactory, Cathara said, reverting to formal protocol. Tomorrow we will begin the preliminary cultural briefings before the formal negotiations commence. Before you go, Marcus said, I wanted to thank you for today. Your insights and explanations have helped me understand not just how this station functions, but why it works so well. You have a remarkable gift for seeing the bigger picture while still managing the crucial details. Cathara stared at him for a long moment, her scarred face reflecting a mixture of confusion and something that might have been hope. Ambassador Chen, I must ask you something directly. Of course. Do you not see how hideous I am? How flawed and imperfect? Her voice carried years of accumulated pain. In my society, I am considered damaged goods, useful only for tasks that do not require public presentation. How can you speak to me as if I were? As if you were what? Marcus asked gently. As if I were beautiful. Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying her face with the same careful attention he had given to the station's remarkable architecture. Then he smiled, the same genuine expression of warmth he had worn throughout their day together. Beauty isn't what you think it is, Cathara.